So good morning. My name is Kristen Vogel Campbell. I'm extremely excited to be here in the space of inquiry and learning at my first AERA. I'm a research practitioner or a practitioner researcher. I'm not in a higher education position. I am a director of special education and student services. And during my time in education, I recognize that I'm part of a system that disenfranchises parents and families from fully engaging in the IEP process. So that was one of the motivations to pursue my graduate degree and my EDD, and that's my why of continuing in the field is, disrupting the inequities. It's necessary to engage parents in dialogue about their journeys, and Ruby and Asha really did touch on that at the beginning. Before I go into my study, I wanted to acknowledge that the school district in which I work at resides on the unceded ancestral land of the Ramaytush peoples, the original peoples of the San Francisco Bay Area. And we acknowledge those ancestors and thank them for their stewardship, and we commit to take care of it, respect it, and use the resources wisely. So just as Ruby touched on, parents of students identified as having a disability under the IDEA are guaranteed the right to meaningfully participate in their child's IEP program. But school districts place greater emphasis on compliance and legally mandated paperwork than the authentic communication and collaboration with parents and families. And then culturally and linguistically diverse families are further disenfranchised and silenced during the IEP process through ineffective interpretation services and a lack of cultural understanding on the part of teachers and other education staff. And then based on my problem of practice, two interconnected needs arose that contributed to the formation of my main research questions. And the first being, what are the experiences of culturally and linguistically diverse families navigating special education in a public school district? The second being, how can an understanding of these families' experiences inform the practice of special education teams? So just a quick dive into the literature and just intentionally utilizing the term parental engagement as opposed to parental involvement. So when we talk about engagement, it positions parents and families on an equal level, whereas involvement just depicts an imbalance of authority and privilege. And knowing the system in which I work and experience, our schools involve parents, but we need to push educators to engage with families. The structure of IEP meetings are often dictated by school staff. And the I in IEP stands for individualized, but the meeting itself and the way that we structure these meetings is extremely depersonalized. So instead of focusing on assets-based language and noting student strengths, many IEP meetings, and I've sat in many as an administrative chair, teachers talk about can'ts and won'ts and not able to. And we need to shift that language to more assets-based language. And finally, educators engage in listening to respond as opposed to active listening. So when this happens, school staff aren't allowing parents to truly participate in the meeting. They're just waiting for the parent to finish speaking so that they can continue the one-sided monologue that they already have prepared. So just quickly focusing on just the medical model of disability, we privilege the abled and we place the onus on the person with a disability to adapt, as opposed to making accommodations that everyone can be supported. Persons with disabilities are othered, they're seen as damaged, less than a fully functioning human. And this crosses over into the school system where services and interventions are determined by legal mandates and not what students authentically need. Medical model is seen as disability needs to be rehabilitated. And this creates spaces for segregated school settings such as resource rooms, special day classes. The only legally authorized segregation in this country is special education. And denying a person with a disability their right to receive an education not only pathologizes the students and their needs, but contributes to the carceral state and the industrial prison complex. So I utilize two theoretical frameworks in my research and work. The first is community cultural wealth, and there are 6 types of cultural wealth: aspirational capital, hopes and dreams; linguistic capital, being able to code switch and navigate, multiple languages; familial capital, intergenerational knowledge, intergenerational storytelling; and the other third spaces: social capital, networks of knowledge and access from extended community associations; resistant capital, and subverting and surviving and thriving in oppressive situations; and finally, navigational capital, being able to maneuver through these structures and systems that weren't set up for, many folks that we interact with to succeed. And the second framework I utilize is disability studies and education, which focuses on the concept of disability within social and cultural contexts. So the important thing to remember is that disability is viewed differently across cultures. Some may view impairment as a deficit, and there are peoples and cultures that view what we perceive as a disability as a gift. So that's important to remember when we're navigating our conversations with families. And in order to fully meet that call, I felt it was necessary to utilize both in order to satisfy my research questions. And Waitoller and King-Thorius have named this cross-pollination of theoretical frameworks. So my methods are participatory research, honoring the knowledge of participants and co-researchers that have traditionally had research done for them instead of with and being centered in that research. And in that process, understanding my positionality as a white educator, decentering myself as that sole source of knowledge, with the words of my collaborators, paving that way for emancipatory research and change for families, educators, and students. So this is just a brief, I'm not going to go into detail about each of the specific families that I am engaged in dialogue with. But one important thing to note is that fathers are typically underrepresented in the research. And that was one of my main goals, was to engage fathers in the research. So 4 of the 11 dialogues involved fathers. 2 were conducted individually and 2 with their child's mother. Students were aged from 9 to 17 years old, and these parent dialogues took place in November and December of 2020. None of the students were receiving their instruction in person due to COVID-19, and I required language interpretation for 3 of the families. However, it's important to note that 6 of the 11 families speak an additional language in the home, and 1 household was actually trilingual. This is a quote from Bell Hooks, just rest in power, that really drives my passion and my learning. It illustrates the importance of dialogue, especially when engaging in critical practice with the purpose of enacting change. It's the simplest way we can begin as teachers, scholars, and critical thinkers to cross boundaries. And I would even say to break down boundaries and the barriers that may or not be erected by race, gender, class, professional standing, and a host of other differences. So that intersectionality piece, that's so important that we need to continue to inject into all of our thinking with parents and families. So I utilized a semi-structured empathetic dialogue protocol. It allows for participants in the dialogue to direct the flow of the conversation. It allows me to follow up with probing questions to clarify my understanding of parents' thoughts, feelings, and experiences. And following up with probing questions: how did that make you feel? Why did you use that word or phrase? And so these 9 prompts guided each of the 11 parent dialogues. And now going into kind of findings, the dialogues revealed several facets of the often fraught and tense relationships existing among parents and special education teachers who were supposed to serve and support children. So the four main themes that came up were convenience of educators, disregard for parent perspectives, the parent as advocate, and a desire for assets-based thinking, as well as collective problem solving. And we'll go into some direct quotes from families now. So here's a quote from Judy, who is the mother of 10-year-old Betsy. And she relays the following about her daughter's mainstreaming experience. She was just a visitor, just passing through. I don't think the teachers ever thought of Betsy as being one of their students. So instead of having a desk of her own, Betsy is squeezed into a space with some other students, often in the back of the room. And Judy relays that it wasn't really in her best interest the way it was set up. It was what was convenient for the teacher. And then to put it another way, she's asking for creativity and acceptance on the part of the classroom teacher instead of denying Betsy her own space in that classroom and that sense of belonging. And then another mother, utilizing her resistant capital and resiliency in the face of an uphill battle, states, "But I don't give up. I haven't given up. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to confront the problem that you see." And all of the 11 dialogues included some aspect of the need for parents to advocate for their children because they felt their child's needs weren't being taken into consideration or met. So parents yearn for school environments that incorporate and honor their familial knowledge, as well as recognizing the aspirations they have for their children. Emily shares her aspirations for a collaborative team when she says, "What I'm really hoping for is for someone at school to say, we think she can really do this, and this is how we're going to get there, and this is what she's got to do to get there." And this is an aspiration, and sadly was not a reality for this family. But not all experiences were negative. And so while we have a long way to go in terms of serving our communities, we must also recognize the islands of hope that put forth by Gloria Ladson Billings. Parents want to be a part of a team that problem solves and comes up with solutions and strategies to support their child's social, emotional, and academic development. And there was a year when everything clicked. It was a perfect combination of experience, optimism, and positive attitude that was a recipe for success. Thinking about possibilities. At every level in the special education process, a true partnership with parents must be intentionally cultivated and maintained. So we must consider possibilities for a more inclusive partnership at every level, from teacher, case manager, site IEP teams, site administrators, special education departments, school boards and labor unions, school districts, county offices of education, and the State Department of Education. Just really highlighting for me, we must, special education departments, and I speak as the head of one, we must make a concerted effort to reduce the number of students currently enrolled in segregated classrooms in schools, and to work with our partners in educational services to ensure that students with IEPs are provided the same opportunities and level of high quality education that students without disabilities receive. There's some information sharing for special education teachers to take on leadership roles, to share their knowledge of differentiated instruction and universal design for learning with their general education colleagues. And this pushes against the ideology of somebody else's students that's embedded within structural functionalism epistemology. And then that's not easy, and that's going to involve mental models and habits of thought and that mindset shift. And that poses the greatest challenge to implementing change. District and site-based leadership are tasked with ensuring that emancipatory change is fully implemented with fidelity. Very basic things, making sure that parents have a copy of paperwork in their home language. And so the San Mateo County Special Education Local Planning Area is at the forefront of utilizing funds and grant money to have documents translated into the languages that represent the communities we serve. So the findings of this research have been presented to the governing board of the county, and currently additional translations are underway for Farsi, Hmong, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Tongan, and Samoan. We have a large Pacific Islander population in our communities, and that's definitely one of the ways that we can continue to engage families. And then just looking at our commitment to students and families, mid or post-COVID, because we're not done. Just making sure that schools and staff understand that parent voice and perspective must be one of the driving forces when recreating our realities. Bettina Love says, we can't go back to the way things were and this is a time for us to co-create and to change and to make something new that works for everyone. Um, you know, and then the other one thing that I wanted to highlight, when I touched base with some of the families, several parents expressed concern for their children's educators, primarily because of the fear of burnout and the turnover of dedicated staff. So we owe it to our families to mirror that concern, that respect, and that care in our interactions with them on the daily. So, a drastic and radical shift is needed. And we can go from our quote on the left to our quote on the right. And how do we make this second quote a reality for each student and each parent? That's the continuing work. And that's, just the further research that's needed by folks in this, virtual meeting and other folks. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It was so great to hear from somebody who's actually in the field and doing this work. And so it's so important. And it was really neat for me to see how your findings layer on to the findings that Ruby and Asha shared. So definitely some really important themes coming out of this roundtable.